This is a variable. This is a maximization problem. There's more out there, and you can be a self-starter if you change your habits. That's long-term thinking. If you thought life could be better in 20 years, after 20 years of applying yourself, would you do it? Anyways, the time of production, commodified time, is an infinite accumulation of equivalent intervals. It is irreversible time made abstract, in which each segment need only demonstrate by the clock its purely quantitative equality with all the others. It has no reality apart from its exchangeability. Under the social reign of commodified time, time is everything, man is nothing, he's at most the carcass of time. The devalued time is the complete opposite of time as terrain of human development. A lot of you have encountered this, or at least the face of this. You've looked this in the face a million times, especially if you're a part of my transgender audience, because you've looked at a form and it's like asking you questions about, like, you know, how you feel about gender or whatever, or how you feel about your identity. I think bisexuals deal with this a lot. You'll be like signing up for a Tinder account, and at the very end of it all, it'll be like, okay, but like if we had to throw you into one or the other, like which one would it be, right? Because that doesn't actually reflect what's being expressed by like non-binary people, or like that's not necessarily expressed by what bisexual people want out of a relationship. You know, like you're truncating reality in order to make forms for like the remote control of like a company, right? You as someone who bought who didn't buy a company, you as someone who was born into a lot of generational wealth, and as a result, own a company that is independent of any superior financial institution when it comes to locating your customers, managing your executive board, managing your finances, or finding funding. We're talking about companies that are still actively producing value for the societies that they exist in, and don't act as some kind of shell, proxy, or fake competition for one of these large companies. The idea is that with these forms, with structuralism, you're imposing some amount of ownership of people's time by enforcing these strict report regimens. What ends up happening is, well, I mean, a lot, right? People become informed by this at work, in the workplace. This could be the first time they encounter something like this. When it comes to people's rights, when things like healthcare or public services become privatized, this is how, you know, companies can bypass democratic process to quietly exclude individuals, you know, especially we've seen in history, like by geographic area, from essential services that are being uh, withheld, that would otherwise enrich their lives in a way that's like significant and does generate disparity in life. I think digitally, how we see this is, I think like the way it's changed is something you don't encounter. There's the Tinder example, but then there's every other way that this is happening without you understanding how you're being excluded from the truth of what's happening. Your privacy is not being respected because your decision rights to how you're represented are being dispossessed. There are companies who make their money by making decisions for you, and that makes you more predictable, but also comes with this like sort of secondary action. So these are companies that don't necessarily like own the means of creating image, right? When it comes to companies who own the means of creating image, they are interdependent with these companies that maintain ownership over any other means of production. And through generations of social norms, and culture evolving, these companies that produce image desire a magnitude of wealth that they can only receive from these companies that own the means of production. And so these companies that create image fall into the incentive structures of these companies that own the means of production. So while these companies that own the means of production, while these companies that uh, create a division of learning in society that generates this algorithmic information, Tinder, X, um, Facebook, Tumblr, TikTok, whatever algorithmic content that you subscribe to, Google through Android, Apple through iOS, whoever is delivering you this information at the same time is working with people who create image, people who create these YouTube stars, people who own bot networks to make anyone online a star, people who do advertising, people who are these cadre of independent I don't know what to call it. Zuboff uses the term mercenary. These independent cadres of mercenaries that spend their time utilizing platforms created by these tech companies. People at these tech companies, what they're doing is they're colluding in a way that's not legally defined to introduce to you propaganda that goes along with this dispossession of your decision rights. So what does that mean? What does that all mean, right? There's a company like Tinder, right? Okay, and Tinder is like the place where you go to hook up, right? So you go on Tinder and you use Tinder and you make this decision about yourself, right? This Tinder data gets brokered to other companies that create ads, that create videos, that create social media presence. And so while you're using Tinder, the world around you is changing how it looks, not by what people are saying, but by what's available, right? So while you're using Tinder, there are special interest groups, telling their kids to get involved in this LGBT project. Well, anyone could do that, right? Except they're not, because everyone is being subjected to something way more foul. So let's just throw away the Tinder idea for a minute and say, okay, let's say we're shopping for groceries, and you are someone who cares about the environment. Well, you can shop responsibly, right? Or you cannot shop responsibly. And so you're now in this community of people who shop responsibly. So someone decides to look into how to really define what shopping responsibly is. And so they read the literature on it, they go through the academic materials, and they realize that there's no way to shop responsibly. And so now they're kind of faced with this choice while they're out and about whether or not they want to represent themselves as someone who has a dissenting opinion. And so while that's happening, everyone who's interested in shopping responsibly is being affected by these companies that talk to the grocery companies, right? That talk to the grocers and the food producers, and they're talking to people who are in tech, and they're like, okay, we want it looks like a lot of our customers are responding well enough to what we have available right now that we don't need to change anything. So I need you to push out a message there that specifically makes these types of people look bad. And this is happening at like tens of thousands of companies. So there's tens of thousands of types of people that these people focus on. These people go out and they go to the video producers, and they don't even have lunch with them anymore. They send the video producers a string of push notifications, and when they see them at a party, they talk to them in such a way that the only thing that makes sense to them are these push notifications. And so now you have some producer looking at push notifications and he's got to talk to someone to get this happening. Well, guess what? That's close enough to the ground where a producer who has recognizable authority, who can't necessarily legally fire anyone, has some control over who they hire someone who they know is going to hire someone who'll do anything they say, right? So now the producer who has all of this like weird information buzzing around in their head that they can't talk about because they sound crazy tells people, this is what's on the board, these are the projects that we have coming in. Network execs, like these internet producers that don't have network executives, this is how they're getting it directly, right? And they're doing this, and they're making a lot of money doing this, and so that becomes a form of social labor that people perform. Is to be around this person, you have to be ready to be a part of this entire thing that remains unregulatable because it is indiscernible from normal life and inspiration, and not normal life and inspiration. And so you might be thinking to yourself like, oh, well, someone should definitely like hone in on this. Well, guess what? In the tech industry, they already did that whole top-down authority thing. So, that one goes as deep as learning can be. That goes all the way to who gets into what school, to who gets beat or not. And this whole structure is made up of a bunch of people who just as unwittingly as you do this work because they believe it's the right way to do it without thinking critically about the process surrounding it. And there's no way to enforce that this process must be understood because academics lags behind in that way. Because the only way anyone knows this is happening is by watching it happen and interviewing people who were a part of it. There's this whole invisible network of information that is creating the content that people observe. I think people understand that pretty intuitively. And that is becoming how people become informed about social labor, because whoever feels like the stakes are higher, whoever feels like they have more to stand to lose from these things, they're already being targeted by myths about like people like fucking stealing from mansions, or like people getting assaulted in the middle of broad daylight. Why was Luigi Mangione so significant? Because it's like the first fucking time that ever happened. But everyone's already acting like it's happening because there is a dedicated nucleus of thinkers in the upper class who talk to people with a lot of free time, who have time to make all of these videos, who tell them this is what a threat is. Go out there and make friends so that you can tell them that this is what a threat is. Even if someone has no power for something to be exercised, they feel the repercussions of something that's essentially going beyond legal process and beyond the law to be enforced, to enforce legal consequences. They're the future crew. They're the virtual people. They're virtual people. They are people who bring virtual reality forward into reality and make it social labor, because they get all these little buzzes on their phone. It's decentralized. So to go after those people is to go after the only company that understands what's happening. So if you need to bring forth experts for this, well, guess what? They already work for the guy. They have a big enough fund that their legal team can push anything out. So if you try them for it, everything else is double jeopardy. So you have to be really specific with how you choose to approach this. Somehow companies can't be subjected to double jeopardy. So you'd think there'd be some kind of oversight board for this. But there was the Vietnam War, and there was the Korean War, and there was all the conflicts in the Middle East since the 90s, all these traumatized people, and then there was everything happening at home. So there was like lead everywhere, there's lead paint everywhere, there's fuel emissions and gas emissions everywhere, there's TV and movies trying to be subversive and instead of bringing forth good morals to drive sales. Everyone's being encouraged to do this. First modernity inefficiencies are still present from the old world, which is not the old world, but something that came after the old world and took its name. And so I make it a point to say, you don't have to do any of this. There's more out there, and you can be a self-starter if you change your habits. Because that's the main way forward out of all of this. And that's what he's talking about in 1960, 1959, whenever this book was published in France, because it's about the commodity homogenizing the culture, because such a key part of this whole scheme is someone having push notifications on their phone and going to parties where it's okay to bring out your cell phone and talk about what you've been doing on your cell phone. That's what Guy Debord's talking about. So to circle back around to the Tinder example, every stupid fucking tweet that you see might not be written by a real person or someone who genuinely feels the way that they feel about saying that. But you're never going to find them because it's a completely anonymous internet. The internet is so anonymous that I can type something in front of you right now. And you would never know if I was actually typing it. I could show you the keyboard. I could break out everything on this computer and show you every event, every keystroke, everything through software, and it would not hold up without the authorities stepping in. That's why when politics surrounding computers stagnated in the 90s, something terrible happened. I hope that made sense. Oh yeah, and another thing, this is a variable. That's why he even mentions that it's equivalent intervals. He's talking about calculus. It is a variable to be maximized. It is a maximization problem, which means further decimation is even needed. Human culture is essentially recognizable human culture in history will be limited and decimated to how advanced bookkeeping can be, how advanced calculations can be, is a limiting factor in the development of human culture and society under this late capitalist force. Someone was born into money, and this is what they did. This is where we are today with it. This general time of human non-development also has a complementary aspect, a consumable form of time based on the present mode of production and presenting itself in everyday life as a pseudo-cyclical time. Yeah, any progress you make is ephemeral as long as you don't make a record of what's happening. And people will try to invalidate those records. So it's incredibly important for credible institutions, for credible organizations to arise out of culture so that it can record itself, so that you can show that this truncation, that this absolute oversimplification of human life is happening. What do you think division's for? We're feeling it today. They were doing it 50 years ago. And we're feeling it today. That's long-term thinking. If you thought life could be better in 20 years, after 20 years of applying yourself, would you do it? The answer should be yes, because that's the only thing that gets anyone out of this.